Hey there everybody, welcome to Cinema Recap. Today we're going to be looking at a sci-fi drama film, Artificial Intelligence. Spoilers ahead.
But we have no reason to congratulate ourselves.
It is the 22nd century, and the world is falling apart at its very seams. Climate change has caused cities to disappear off the face of the earth, and resources are spread thin. Governments impose laws restricting how many kids people can have, and mechas have become the backbone of society. In a meeting at Cybertronics, Professor Alan Hobby shows how robots lack emotional function. But that's about to change. He wants to make robotic children capable of genuine love for people to fill a void left by the population control measures. His colleagues posed the question of what would make a human love a mecha back. But he doesn't answer that question because he doesn't know the answer. He only has hope.
The word that I used was love.
So now 22 months later, Monica and Henry Swinton drive to visit their son, Martin, in the hospital. He's currently placed in suspended animation after he caught a rare disease. Now the doctor isn't hopeful about Martin's odds of survival. He's thinking that Monica's avoiding grief and warns Henry that she can still be reached. Now while the Swintons visit their son, Professor Allen is informed that one candidate amongst the many employees was chosen to test the first mecha child. And that employee is Henry.
Henry, your son may be beyond our science.
Now back at their home, Henry walks in and asks Monica to not become hysterical before introducing David, the mecha child. She doesn't take it well, feeling all ambushed and hurt at Henry for essentially replacing Martin. He explained that he's only trying to make their lives better, and eventually she comes around to the idea of having another child in their home. So they're watching as David walks around looking through their family photos. Henry explains that if they choose to keep David, they need to conduct an imprint protocol, which is irreversible. He hands her the paperwork to sign, and she determines if this is what she wants. He warns her to only enact the imprint protocol when she's 100% sure that she wants to keep him. So they put David to bed, and Monica's visibly unsure. She bolts out of the room when David asks her to dress him in his pajamas. And he looks at her through the door as Henry helps him get dressed. Now the following day, Monica actively tries to avoid David. They eat dinner together, but David just has an empty plate and a glass before him. So now he starts to imitate what they're doing, and when a piece of spaghetti doesn't go all the way down into Monica's mouth, David laughs at her, scaring her at first before they join in on the laughter. Now that's a way to break the tension. So Monica helps David get ready for bed and tucks him in. She's staring at him, thinking about Martin. And the following day, she decides to enact the imprint protocol. After reciting the code to him, she thinks she's doing it wrong. But when he calls her mommy, she realizes that it worked. He then hugs her, causing Monica to tear up.
I found you.
So now some time has passed and there's been a considerable shift. Monica begins to love David like he's her own child. But Henry becomes cold towards David. And before they leave for a party, she gives him a talking teddy bear to keep him company. Now one day, Monica gets a frantic call from Henry, who's telling her that Martin's coming back home. And when he's brought back, he's in a wheelchair, still rather sick, but apparently on the road to recovery. Well, she introduces him to David. And it's clear from his face that he's worried. So Martin and David seem to be getting along just fine, but David finds himself constantly confused whenever Martin mentions him not being real. So later on, Martin asks his mother to read them a story, but his choice of a story is questionable. He chose Pinocchio. It's becoming clear by the day that Martin has it out for David. Now one day, while eating dinner, Martin creates a competitive eating situation. The problem is that David can't eat as he's a robot, something that Teddy tried to warn him about.
You're not cute like a doll.
Monica and Henry try to stop them both, but it's too late. David's face melts away. Technicians come and fix David up. And later on, Martin instructs David to go on a special mission, which involves him getting a lock of Monica's hair. He tries to reject the mission, but Martin tells him that because he promised, he has to do it. So in their room, Monica wakes up to scissors in her face. She freaks out, and David proceeds to cut a lock of her hair, which falls to the ground where Teddy stands. Henry gets up and violently shakes him, asking him why he did that, and David tells him that all he wanted was for his mommy to love him more. So while preparing for Martin's birthday party, Monica has forgiven the incident, chalking it down to two brothers being competitive. Henry argues that if David was built to love, he likely knows how to hate.
I wanted mommy to love me.
That if pushed to those extremes, What more would he be capable of? He seems to forget that this was his idea, and it's not lost on her how he sounds. So as the party begins, Martin and his friends gang up on David. Eventually, Martin goes to defend him, but not nearly enough. One kid's curious to know if he has any damage avoidance system, so he takes David's arm and stabs him. While he doesn't feel pain, he reacts by going behind Martin, asking him to keep him safe. But Martin's not having it, screaming out for Monica. They fall into the pool and David continues holding on. Even when all the adults jump in and try to get him to let go, they pull Martin out, leaving David at the bottom of the pool. Now eventually they retrieve him from the pool, and Monica goes over and talks to him about what happened. She stops and sees that he was writing something, so she looks at his work and sees the letters he was writing to her, telling her how much he loves her. And in 1 or 2 letters he mentions Henry. Monica becomes slightly emotional. She sits down and tells David that they're going to take a drive into the country tomorrow, and we all know what that means. Monica drives while David's looking around, taking in the trees. He asks her where they're going and if it's someplace nice. Well, she doesn't answer those questions. When she tears up, he asks if they're happy tears, and she still doesn't answer. They pull up into the Cybertronics facility. Monica turns and stops the car in the forest. David runs out and sets down a blanket. Monica chases after him and tries to explain that she's leaving him there. Well, he doesn't understand that at first. But when he realizes she's never coming back, he begs her not to leave. She explains to him that this was her only choice, otherwise they'll destroy him. He continues begging as she's getting overwhelmed with emotions and tries to break free from his grip. She gets to the car, but he's still there. She tells him that he needs to run, to find another Mecha. She also tells him to avoid going in the facility's direction. He doesn't understand why she's leaving him behind. Unable to handle the complex emotions of the situation, Monica runs to the car and drives away.
Now look, don't go that way, all right?
Now in the city, a mecha man by the name of Gigolo Joe is pleasing a woman who's nervous about sleeping with a mecha. He tells her to relax as once it's over, she'll never want a real man again. After his encounter, he walks the streets to a hotel where he gets a room. Now the guy at the front desk tells Joe to flash his license now and then, as the flesh fair is on the hunt. Inside the room, he finds the woman that he's meant to meet, murdered. Her husband appears behind him, admitting to being the killer. He kisses her and leaves. Joe realizes that he's in trouble. He quickly escapes that building and removes his license. Now as David's walking the forest, he tells Teddy he's going to find the blue fairy so he can become a real boy.
She can make me into a real boy.
And as he continues walking through that forest, a truck drops a bunch of mecha parts into a pit. Well, David watches as a group of mecha swarm the junk heap, trying to find salvageable parts. Joe runs through the forest just above where the trash pit is and sees a blinding light. A mecha announces a rising moon, which is an air balloon owned by the Flesh Fair looking for robots. They destroy them on stage for entertainment. Upon hearing this, the mechas run, including David. Before we go on, like the video, smash the subscribe button, and turn on that notification bell to join our expendable squad. So now motorbikes are chasing down the mechas while they target Joe specifically. The Flesh Circus captures them all. David drops Teddy and walks to the arena where they destroy the mechas. He's caught and put in a lost and found. David's watching on as they destroy the mechas and is scared. He's holding Joe's hand out of fear. And Teddy escapes and gets to the cage where they're keeping David, but is suddenly grabbed by a girl. Now the girl and David look at one another. She runs to the control room and tells her father that a boy's in the cage. She's thinking he's real, and her father looks at the camera and sees a scared David. David asks the mechas why this is happening, and they tell him that the humans despise them and get rid of enough of them to maintain numerical superiority.
Why is this happening?
They come and take away a mecha and nearly take David too. The control room operator inspects David and determines he's a mecha, but he's shocked. He's never seen a kid mecha before. He tells David he's one of a kind, and he argues with the fair impresario about David's fate, saying he shouldn't meet the same fate as the others. Now the impresario doesn't care and drags David to the death field. David, clearly afraid, drags Joe along with him, and then they set David and Joe up for their death. The impresario preaches about David being made to replace human children, and when acid falls on David's shoulder, he cries out and begs for his life, which makes the audience wonder if he's really a mecha.
Don't hurt me!
Eventually, they allow David and Joe to escape. So the professor is informed that they've located David at a flesh fair. He fears they've done their worst to him, but is then informed that he's safe. So now in the forest, David and Joe are traveling far away from that flesh fair, and Joe's asking him why he's on the run, to which he says that he's looking for the Blue Fairy. And when Joe learns that the Blue Fairy's a woman, he tells David he knows all about women and can be of help. He tells David if there's one place to go find women, it's Rogue City. He says it's far and dangerous, so the two travel towards the moon on the way to Rogue City. And Joe convinces a group of teens to take him and David to the city with the promise of women built to please. Now they arrive in the neon haze that is Rogue City, and Joe's guiding him through this city in search of Dr. No to find this Blue Fairy he speaks of. So they meet this doctor, who's nothing more than an advanced version of Google, who appears as a hologram of Einstein. So David's asking questions about the Blue Fairy, but eventually asks how the Blue Fairy can turn him into a real boy.
Welcome to Dr. No.
A quote from Professor Allen's book comes up as the answer. To find the Blue Fairy, they're told to go to the end of the world, where the lions weep. Well, Joe says Mecca never returned from there, and that's why it's called Manhattan. David insists that they must go to Manhattan. On the way out, Joe questions if the Blue Fairy's even real. He's afraid of what awaits them, knowing full well how humans hate Meccas. Well, David fights back, saying that his mommy doesn't hate him, and he tells David humans can't love Mecca. Joe offers David to stay in Rogue with him where it's safe for their kind, but David doesn't listen, so he bids Joe farewell and walks away. Now outside, Mr. No's team is there to collect Joe for the murder of the woman in the hotel. As they load Joe into the police van, David hijacks a plane. Joe ends up escaping and joins him on the plane, taking the wheel and leading him to Manhattan. Their escape is less than smooth. So they're approaching Manhattan, which is nothing but a city submerged in water, and they find a building with lion statues and approach the loading bay. When inside, they stumble on a door with text written on it. They walk inside and find a boardroom.
Blue Fairy?
A turned chair makes David think Professor Hobby's sitting there, but when the chair turns around, he sees another mecha who looks exactly like him. Well, he's shocked and upset, and he tells the other David that he can't have her. And he progressively gets angrier before destroying his doppelganger in a fit of rage. And Joe backs up before completely running away. Professor Hobby runs in and tries to make David feel better. He tells him he's been waiting for him. David asks if the Blue Fairy's there because Dr. No said she'd be there. But he tells him they intervened and made Dr. No tell him what he needed to get him to Manhattan. Well, now David's sad. But Alan tells him how much of a success he is, considering he chased his dreams, something they never thought possible from a mecha. He's the first machine to possess such human qualities. David expresses his disappointment, saying he thought he was one of a kind. Alan tells him that his son David was one of a kind. The Mecha David is a first of his kind. But he's not suffering from a loss of identity, feeling no more special than any old mecha. So Alan tells David he's going to grab his creators and leaves David alone.
Or replaced you with a younger model.
So now David eventually stumbles upon many versions of himself. One's boxed and ready to go. There's even a female version called Darlene. Despondent, David sits on the balcony overlooking the flooded city and throws himself into the ocean. Joe's watching as he falls below the surface. Now at the bottom, David looks ahead, seeing her. He's pulled out of the ocean by Joe. He tells him he saw her before he was pulled out, and then an aircraft collects Joe, but before he's taken away, he makes the plane submerge so David can find his Blue Fairy. He's traveling deep down and enters an old fairground that has a Pinocchio section. That's what he meant when he said he saw the Blue Fairy. And as he's staring at that fairy statue, a Ferris wheel falls on him, trapping him. So David makes a wish to be a real boy, but nothing happens. For 2,000 years, David remains trapped in the helicopter. The ocean's now frozen over. Aliens are traveling through Manhattan, a place they've now colonized. They stumble upon the plane and find David frozen, along with Teddy. David wakes up and sees the aliens before him. Then he sees the Blue Fairy for the first time in hundreds of years. He starts approaching her while the aliens watch on, and they talk to one another, saying that this robot would have known real people. Well, David holds the Blue Fairy's hand and it falls to pieces. So the aliens approach David, with one reviewing his memories of people before they all join in to experience his memories of humans. Now David's taken to the home from his memories. He runs around looking for Monica, but nobody's home.
Daddy, we're home.
He comes across the blue fairy and asks her to make him a real boy, but she tells him she can't do that. Meanwhile, aliens watching him from afar. David's questioning why he's in this place that was home, but now feels a bit different. Well, the blue fairy tells him they want him to be happy, that he's important to him. So David asks if his mommy's coming back soon, and the fairy tells him that she can never come home. But they can bring people from his past back. He asks why they can't bring her back, but he's informed that because they don't have a body, or any sample to recreate her from, it's not possible. Just then, Teddy brings David the hair he cut that long time ago. Oh, he kept it, and David offers it to the blue fairy, and the aliens agree to recreate Monica. Now, an alien visits David and explains that if they bring Monica back, it'll only be for a day. They discovered that the fabric of space-time itself contains individual space-time pathways that cannot be reused, so anyone brought back cannot stay forever. Well, David's arguing that maybe she's special, and he tells David that he wants him to be happy, and David says if that's true, he'll do what he's asking. Well, the sun rises, and the aliens tell him that Monica's waking up and he must go to her. David finds her sleeping in her bed, like everything he's been through had never happened. They share a wonderful day. He's feeling loved and happy. Now, before Monica falls asleep, she tells David she loves him, and that she's always loved him. And the moment he waited for thousands of years had happened, and now David could rest too, living in this moment rather than carrying on alone. All he ever wanted was his mommy to love him, and he got everything he wanted. Thanks for sticking through. This was our recap of the film Artificial Intelligence, released back in 2001 by Warner Brothers Picture. It starred Haley Joel Osment, Jude Law, and Frances O'Connor. I don't know, would you be able to love a robotic child like it was truly your own? Let us know with that hashtag #CinemaRecap in the comments.